Hi, Christie.
Hi, Jeff.
We're recording now.
The many hours of conversation you and I have had,
Yeah.
we've had probably half of them that haven't been recorded.
You know what we should do? We should start a podcast.
You think? Let's call it the why and the buy.
All right. Welcome back to the Why and the Buy podcast. My name is Jeff Bajorek, and I'm here as always with the lovely Christie Walters. How are you today, Christie?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm really excited because today we get to talk about goal setting. And this is a topic that I know you're just chomping at the bit to get going at. And the interesting thing, the irony there is that goal setting is like pulling teeth when it comes to salespeople, when it comes to people, right?
Yes.
We're in the very early stages still of 2017. And most people out there don't have goals. They don't have them set. And they don't even, if they did have them set, they don't have really any plan for attacking them. And why is it so difficult to think about what we want, think about what we want to be, think about what we want to get?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it so difficult to do that when ultimately it's about our success and what we want out of life?
Yeah, because it requires a plan, and it requires work and day by day, consistent, persistent action to get to that goal or that dream. And most people don't break it down far enough, or they try to bite off more than they can handle, right? So that we set these lofty goals, and then we just think, okay, well, I'm going to lose 50 pounds by June. Yeah, but I have no plan. And oh, by the way, I didn't go to the grocery store with a list, and I don't have a workout regimen or anything of that nature. So I know where I want to be, and I have no clue how to make that leap to get there. And in many cases, I also don't even evaluate where I'm starting from. You know, when I talk to people about goal setting, it's great to have lofty goals. Zig Ziglar said this. He said, you can take a big step or a small step. Just take a step,
right? Whatever
you can do, and take it now, right? So ultimately, people really struggle with bridging that gap between this is where I want to be and this is where I am today. And these are the daily actions I need to take to get there.
The interesting thing about that, the value and the importance of daily actions is if you take a daily action, you're going to get somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you have an end goal in mind or not, you're going to get somewhere. And sometimes that's part of the fun is, I wonder what would happen if I journaled every single day. And maybe that doesn't relate to ultimately what you want to do. You and I both know that helps to make people successful just because of the clarity of the thought that comes out of that regular practice.
Sure.
But if you were just to do something that you know is going to be valuable, even if you don't know how or in what way it's going to be valuable, the value itself will present itself, right?
Yeah.
Then there's people who say, I want to lose 50 pounds, but then they still think that they can have 2 beers after work every day. And, I didn't really plan ahead to cook at home, so it's going to be takeout again, or, whatever it is. And they don't take those steps back. It's the couple that decides they're going to lose 25 pounds before their wedding next year. And then 6 months later, they're 5 pounds heavier than when they started. Right. And then, oh no, well, it was the stress, and well, it was this. And there are so many things. You have to ultimately decide what's important to you first.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that gets often overlooked is the goal that you're setting, or does the goal that you have set for you align with what is really most important to you?
Yeah. Isn't that critical? And how often we forget that element of goal setting, right? You have to, and sometimes it's hard to put a goal like I'm going to hit my quota, or I'm going to lose this weight, or I'm going to build this aspect of my career up. We put it in such arbitrary terms, and it's very unemotional. And ultimately, goals are dreams, right? I mean, goals are dreams that you have for yourself. And so there's so much emotion. You have to give the emotion its place in your goal setting and your planning and that process. And if you can't, sometimes you have to say, it's not that I'm going to lose 50 pounds. I want to be healthy so that I can run around with my grandkids in the summer this year. And I don't want to have to feel like I'm winded or something of that nature. Then all of a sudden it's about someone else. It's not just about you. It's interesting how oftentimes it's a lot easier to do something on someone else's behalf than it is to do something just because it's for you.
It's about your why, Christie. And that's why we named our podcast what we did. I read a book once called Change or Die. It came out several years ago, a long time ago. And, you look at people who have heart disease and they're told, listen, life or death, you got to eat better. You've got to exercise. You've got to get your heart rate up. You've got to do this. You got to stop smoking. You got to stop drinking. You got to stop doing all this other stuff. And the patient internalizes that as somebody told me to do something that I didn't really want to do and was going to be really uncomfortable for me to change. Therefore, I won't do it. And even with death as the consequence, an early death, a premature death as the consequence, some dude told me I needed to do this, or some woman that I don't respect anyway told me I had to do something. And then there's so many deeper seated kind of issues with those, kind of circumstances. But the people who think about, wow, if I die early, then I won't get to see my daughter get married. I won't get to see my grandkids graduate high school, or, whatever that is. You look at the people who say from an early age or even middle age, say, I want to have great grandkids one day. And then all of a sudden, everything else kind of falls into line. If that goal is really in alignment with who you are as a person, who you want to become, then it makes it very easy to make some changes.
Yeah.
I look at some of the health issues that my parents and grandparents have had, and it's like, okay, what of those am I going to be able to control? And what am I really stuck with that's a circumstance that I have to work around? I can complain about a bad family history, and I can complain, well, I'm not allowed to do this because I've got a high cholesterol runs in my family or whatever. And it's like, okay, so what do I do about that?
Right.
And it's like complaining and griping about your sales quota. Are you going to complain about that? Or are you just going to get to work? That complaint is a wasted energy.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go down that tangent because we haven't gotten to, that dissonance between your values and your goals, because that's kind of where we started. And I want to just touch on the fact that personally, I'm a husband and a father and then a business person. I'm a sales guy, right? And then if there's any time left, I like to think of myself as a golfer, but that's another difference. But if I said I wanted to grow my business 300% this year, I could do it.
Yeah.
But at the expense of my relationship with my wife and with my kids.
That's right.
So that's not a worthwhile goal. Right in line with, am I being told that this is my goal? Or did I just think this was going to be a goal that was going to impress somebody or whatever? Is the goal that you're setting, are the goals that you're setting ultimately going to help you be in line with the person you want to be?
Yeah. Well, and I love what you said in the beginning of that rant? Statement too, is that that rant is that, what can I control and what can I not, right? I think that is an element that's really important. Is a lot of people will churn on things that they can't control and allow that to be the blocker, right? So they'll wasted energy. That's a phrase that I like to use a lot. And it is a lot of wasted energy when you're focused on, especially in a sales environment where quotas are brought down from several layers up, and sometimes they're brought down without much explanation, and they're fairly sizable numbers. And oh, by the way, maybe some of those mitigating factors that made you successful in 2016 are no longer there in 2017. Maybe your competitive landscape is changing. There's a lot of stuff that's going to affect your success in 2017. I worked with a client just this last year at the very beginning of 2016, and they struggled for weeks with the idea of how large their quota was. And I'm like, well, do you have a plan to go into the office of the CEO and campaign for changing it? And they're like, well, no, of course not. That's not something that we can do. And I'm like, well, can you really not do it? Or is it something that you don't feel like you can do? And they're like, no, we really can't You can't change it. And I'm like, well, then stop worrying about it. Stop, excuse my language, bitching about it, right?
Sure.
I mean, you're wasting all this energy that you could be spending on identifying what you can do in this time period. So, and I think we can probably spend some time, and I think you and I probably know some really solid sales leaders that we can bring on for interviews to talk about the appropriate way to set and manage sales quotas over time. And I think that's probably a good exercise for us. So I don't want to dive too far into it today, but setting a goal isn't enough. Having that number isn't enough. You have to go through a process to break that number down and understand what it means on a daily activity basis, right? So baseline, I basically break it down into 3 main steps, right? So you establish your baseline, you challenge your assumptions, which I think you need to do every year and in every aspect of your life. And then you break it down into manageable segments, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting too, and you brought it up as part of those 3 steps, is challenging your assumption and your beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
But how many people do you know who are put in a brand new situation and just don't know how to act?
Yeah.
Right. So you go from, let's just say you get a great break and you get an opportunity. You've been in sales for a little while and you get an opportunity that comes along, a recruiter calls you, whatever it is. And all of a sudden it's big boy selling or big girl selling. And you're selling for millions in dollars instead of tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, all of a sudden you've got to know that you belong. And that's a tricky thing. And then especially as it relates to people who did not grow up wanting to be in selling, which includes like 98% of the population who don't, when they're 7 years old, say, I want to be in sales when I grow up. All of a sudden you go from something that you think is humble and worthy and worthwhile and just, salt of the earth kind of work, right? And I went and I got a degree and I got an education and I honed a skill or a craft. And then you take an opportunity to go in sales and there's a disjointed kind of feeling to that, right? I don't know if I quite belong here. I'll tell you what, if you don't think you belong here, you got to either straighten that out or you got to get out, right?
Oh, fake it till you make it. I mean,
well, and there's something about faking it till you make it. Like, okay, I'm feeling it out. Okay. But after that initial feeling it out process, you've got to decide whether you believe you can make it. And if you can make it, then let's get to work. And if you can't, then you're always going to be spinning your wheels because that belief that you belong, whether it is in a new career, maybe it's sales, maybe it's not sales, or maybe it's just in a new sales gig, or maybe it's in a sales management gig. Or it's in a vice presidential role. You've got to ultimately, whenever that change comes, you've got to reset your beliefs.
Right.
And you've got to reset your beliefs in order to get that promotion. You've got to listen, you promote yourself way before you get the promotion, right? Those don't happen by accident. And that's the reason they happen is, and I'm not saying you're gunning after your sales manager's job. What I'm saying is I know I'm a vice president type material. I know I've got that talent. I know I've got that ability. I'm going to go find myself a vice president job. Even if it means I got to leave this place, people do that and they do well because they set that goal. They understand what it needs to take. And the interesting thing is too, I've worked with people who have interviewed for promotions and things inside of companies. After the interview, they're different. They perform at a higher level because all of a sudden in that interview process, even if they didn't get the job, in that interview process, they see themselves in the role. And then all of a sudden that imprints itself and it goes back with them to their day-to-day activities. And they start, oh, well, what if I was the VP? Oh, I would definitely act this way. And they walk a little taller and wear a nicer shirt to work the next day, right? They carry themselves differently. They talk differently. And a lot of times it's very, very subtle, but it's noticeable if you're paying attention to it. And ultimately that goal is nothing. If you don't believe you can get there, then the goal is meaningless.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the killer in sales in general, right? I mean, I think belief in what you're doing and what you're offering to the world is so critical in being able to be successful in general. And I think, companies need to challenge their assumptions too. And you look at we could take this 100 different directions, but, in an organization, that has been successful for many years, it's very easy to get lazy and to just think that, well, this has always worked. So we're going to do what has always worked. And there's some truth and value in doing that. But you have to always assume that change is coming. It is the only constant you can count on, right?
Absolutely.
And so change in your competitive landscape is critical. You look at what is happening with the change in our workforce. We've got a very large number of older workers that have kind of established our company cultures up to this point, and they're going to be retiring in the next 10 years. You've got a big, huge group of millennials that communicate in a completely different way. That's going to come into the workforce, and things are going to change. They're already changing, but they're going to change in a drastic way. So if a company isn't really taking a hard look at those basic assumptions and understanding, is the language of the customer changing? Is the value that we provide our customer changing? Those are questions that you cannot afford to ignore, because you might be able to squeak it out this year. But I guarantee you, if you're looking 5 years out, you're going to regret not taking a hard look at how can you change that organization or your organization to make sure that you're going to be viable for the future.
Well, and taking stock and taking that measurement of where you are today as a company and where you are today as a salesperson. And when you think about really smart companies will do things in terms of product mix, right? So, I'd get a quota every year and the quota would be whatever it was, let's just say is $1.5 million. So here's $1.5 million. And we don't want you to just do $1.5 million though, Jeff. Okay. The base business makes up 1.2. But this 300 grand we want you to grow this year, we want it to come in this segment, and this segment, and this segment, because the smart people in marketing and the smart people in leadership can look ahead and say, all right, landscape's changing. So we can't give up on the product that pays our bills, that butters our bread, so to speak. But we have to start putting some focus in these areas here so that when the landscape does, and when the tide eventually does go out, that we've got something to fill it back in with, which leads us right into the next part of your goal setting. Kind of 3 points of goal setting there is when that tide comes out, having that longer term plan and that longer term goal, but then also backing that up. So it's a 5-year goal down into years, and it's a yearly goal into quarters, or it's a monthly goal into weeks. It can be a weekly goal into days. Everybody's going to have to find their own sweet spot for segmentation and the way they want to look at those things. But how can you change course if you've got a 5-year goal? How do you know if you're on pace? How do you change course if you don't know the course that you're on?
Right.
And you've got to have some structure. There certainly has to be some rigidity to your goal setting, but you have to be flexible within those parameters. Otherwise, we've seen it before. Inflexible companies or rigid companies get lapped by their competition.
Oh, yeah. And inflexible employees get lapped as well.
By millennials.
By millennials, that's right. But, I do think that all the things that we talk about from a company perspective apply down to the individual. And I know we're talking in kind of broader terms right now, but, as an individual, when you look at these 3 critical elements, and goal setting is not a one-time event. So there's certainly, there's more material here than we could cover in 5 podcasts, much less 1, right? But if you know where you've been, if you understand your baseline, you've really taken a hard look at what that looks like, and not just one number or not just one element. You've got to look at the layers that made up the success that you had or failure. I mean, you've got to evaluate your failures too. What were those elements in 2016? If that's the schedule that you're looking at, if you're looking at the last year, then what does your baseline look like? Where are you starting from? And then what is your objective? Do you understand the assumptions that you're making in setting that objective? And are you being realistic in doing so? Meaning that are you really kind of saying, am I setting this because I always set this at the beginning of the year? Or am I setting this because I know that this is what my objective is? and then you break it down. And I tell you, one of the books, and I know you and I always pick out books that we like for each topic, and I need to do a lot more reading on this, but I love the book, The 12-Week Year. Brian Moran wrote The 12-Week Year, and it comes from this concept that if you look at company after company after company, there is this huge uptick at the end of every year, and sometimes at the end of every fiscal quarter. And it's because there's this tremendous amount of pressure in the system to have people perform at that particular moment in time. And then there's also a lot of celebration that takes place at the end of the year. People have contests, that type of thing. And so, what happens is we ramp up and we burn ourselves out in that time period. And then we come down from it, it's like, okay, now I can take a deep breath. And then by the time we've taken a deep breath, it's time to ramp back up again. And so you end up with these, kind of wave graphs for sales revenue. And he said, if we were truly to take every 12 weeks and break it down and do the celebrations, do the goals, and do the planning every 12 weeks, then we could have much more consistent success. And this isn't just quarterly goal setting, right? This is truly breaking down your year into a 12-week year. So there's a lot of concepts that I'm still kind of wrestling with this book, but it was very interesting. And he talks a lot about managing your day-to-day activities to 85%, which means that if you break down your goals, so say you take that 12-week year and you break it down into daily activities. I know that I need to increase my exposure in these particular markets. So these are the people that I'm going to network with. These are the activities that I'm going to be involved with. This is the outcome I think those activities are going to have as it relates to my goal. If you're not on a regular basis, say on a weekly basis, meeting at least 85% of those objectives, then you got to stop and reset. Right. Because something's not right. Either your head's not in it, you set the wrong goals, or you got the wrong plan. That's the other thing I think that a lot of people do when they set goals, is that they build out a plan that's unrealistic and doesn't allow for some breathing room. And then they either don't hit it right away, and so they give up, or they don't come back and evaluate it again and say, well, now wait a second, I'm doing pretty well in these 3 categories, but you know what, these 2 categories, I might need to do something different here to make sure that I'm hitting the right stride. So when you think about breaking things down even further, I really recommend that book as a reference point. So it brings up some interesting stuff to think about.
Well, it does. And I think what it forces you to do is a yearly exercise 4 times a year. Yeah. And most people set their New Year's resolutions once a year. Most people don't go back to their New Year's resolutions, since most of them are defunct by February.
By the end of January, right?
Listen, There is an empty spot on 80% of the treadmills by February 14th. Yep. That's just at the gym. That's just the way it goes. That's why I just don't go to the gym. But
there's never an empty spot at the golf course, by the way.
Oh, that's another discussion. But by making you do, or suggesting anyway, that you do these exercises 4 times a year, your goals have to be a little shorter term, but they also have to be a little more agile, and they have to be a lot more able to stand up to scrutiny. Yeah. What that does is, over time, it allows you to evaluate the validity of those goals in the first place. Yeah. And, a goal that's impossible to reach is not worth setting. A goal that you don't believe you can reach, whether it's possible or not. More is possible than we realize if you just frame yourself and your own capabilities and your own baseline correctly. Right. I love this 3-point stance, so to speak. Yeah. Understand your baseline, reaffirm yourself of your own beliefs, and eliminate assumptions along the way, and then set intermediate targets along your journey ultimately, so that you can make sure you're still on the right path. There are a million ways to hit your number. Yeah. What is the way that's going to make the most sense? And I think, goal setting, you talk about the quarterly upticks and then the annual upticks and everything. It's, wow, it's amazing what we can come up with. It's amazing what we're capable of when we really have a deadline that we're up against.
Yeah.
And why is it that we wait? And wouldn't it just be better if we consistently put, progress up, and we consistently put up results, and when we just performed at an even baseline all the way across, instead of mailing it in for the first 2 months. Right. And why don't we just kind of steady? And instead of the end of the quarter, instead of the end of the year, think about the end of time. You think about the end of your career.
Yeah.
And when you step back that far, you do things a little bit differently. And, I like to tell people that I made a career out of being easy to work with.
Yeah.
Because I would rather make the sale later than push it and blow it right now.
Right.
And just be a little more patient. And then all of a sudden, it's not long before you just get this momentum going, and that deal that didn't close this quarter closes next quarter. And then, maybe you have one bad quarter. I don't know of a company out there. I'm sure there are, but I don't know of a company out there that's going to fire you for having a bad quarter, one bad, right, especially in your first year, right? Yeah. You get a little bit of a leash. And so that's where kind of a dialogue with your sales manager comes along. When they set that quota, all right, I'm brand new. Why is this my quota? Well, we think you can do this, 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 and this. Okay, if you think I can do those 4 things, can you help me devise a plan for how to attain that? Look, if I'm carrying out the plan, can we both take a look at this plan if it's not working and see why it's not working and reevaluate? As a sales rep, I always tried to offer transparency into what I was doing. Mm-hmm. Right? A lot of sales reps out there don't like the idea of Big Brother looking at their CRM and tracking their mileage and all these other things. They just want to control me, what I do. Look, if I offer transparency, a lot of times I'll get transparency.
Yeah, right.
And that's where relationships happen, right? And then, you know what? When I come up a little short, look, this is why I came up short, but that's because this stuff isn't going to close till next week. Unfortunately, the 30th is Thursday, so it's going to close next week. We're going to be off to a good start the next quarter, and we're really not behind schedule, but just this thing happened. So sorry about our urgency, but the long-term relationships of our customers and our ability to repeatedly hit that quarter after quarter after quarter is really determined by the fact that we're not putting a gun to someone's head and saying, sign the papers by the 30th, even though you're not ready. Right. There's so much that gets lost in that short-term, short-sighted cycle.
Yes.
So that flexibility is so valuable, and it just requires looking into it a little more often.
Yeah. Well, and I think what I love about what you just described is you just described a team member and a sales leader as accountability partners, right? So one of the things that is critical for success in any type of extreme stretch goal is to have an accountability partner. If you take your explanation of, I'm developing the relationship for the long haul, and, so it's not a short-term element, which means we're not necessarily looking at the success or failure of this relationship based on a single quarter, right? What happens over time is that all of that starts to even out. So, for those sales leaders who just kind of went, oh my God, you're telling my people that they can build relationships and not worry about the short-term sale, that's not it at all. I think it really has so much more to do with the building the relationship sets the foundation for a much more sustainable long-term plan and a long-term relationship with that customer. So all of those things tend to even out over time if you've established yourself as a trusted partner.
Well, what I will tell people is not to force a short-term sale at the expense of a relationship.
That's exactly right. Exactly. It's not, most of us aren't selling commodities, right?
Well, wait. Every sales guy out there shaking his head, throwing his hands up in the air. Don't get into an accident if you're listening to this. But we're all commoditized. My customer, we're commodity. They're going to go to the cheapest price. I got a this. We got a discount. No. Yeah. One, you got to call that what it is, which is a garbage excuse.
Right.
But you have to get everybody on the same page with what the real goal is.
Right.
You want consistent, sustainable success and consistent, sustainable outcomes and results, or do you want to just hit this quarter and then start scrambling all over again for the next quarter? The more you're able to deliver, the more your sales managers and their sales managers will be able to take your word for it.
Yes.
And you'll be able to, you'll build that credibility and the ability to make audacious suggestions like, I'm not going to push this out before the end of the quarter because I don't want to do that to my customer. But if you're going to deliver every single time, I mean, it's amazing. Some of the things that I've done and other people like me have done that are so contrary to what happens, but have ultimately worked out and have ultimately led to sustainable success.
Right.
You got to decide what you want. You got to decide if the goals that you're setting, again, are in line with the company or the person you want to be.
Right.
And, we all make decisions. We all make choices. And you have to make those decisions ahead of time. It's tough to do. It is necessary to do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we're close to being out of time.
Time?
I know. Time.
Are you trying to force the close on this?
I'm forcing the close on
podcast.
Absolutely. So I think, I think in close, again, we've been all over the board on this particular topic, but the message I think is very clear. You've got to know where you're coming from. You've got to make sure that you're not making incorrect assumptions. Make sure that you're challenging those on a regular basis. And you've got to break it down. And I think I'll add a fourth one simply because you brought it up. You need an accountability partner. You need someone that you can sit down with on a regular basis and say, this is where I am. This is what I had wanted to do. I'm behind here. I'm ahead here. What am I missing? You need someone that you trust in that space to be able to have that conversation. So that accountability partner is critical. Hopefully, if you're on a sales team, that's your sales leader or a more senior sales rep to you. But if it's not, I encourage you to go find somebody to do that, whether it's a coach or friend. Find that individual that can be that accountability partner for you.
It can be your mom. It doesn't matter.
It can't be my mom.
Well, okay, maybe not your mom.
No, Mom, I love you. God, I should not have said that. No, not in that way. It's, I think what you have to be cautious about with family relationships is that there tends to be, you want to make sure it's an unbiased relationship. So I usually don't choose my spouse as my accountability partner or my family members.
And that's good.
My sister can do it.
That's good advice. Ultimately, if you're fortunate enough to work in a great organization, it can be your manager or your sales leader or just someone, I've done it with people who are on the same organizational level as me, but I just trusted to be able to call BS. Yeah. Right. And that's all you, and just to be someone.
And I think that's critical. I think if you need somebody who can do that in a productive way.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I love you, Mom.
I love you too, Christie's mom. Thank you for joining us today. We do this podcast because we believe that when you know your whys, your whats and your hows get much better. And we hope that you're better for listening to our podcast on goal setting. Christie, until next time.
I will see you when I see you.
Sounds good. That'll be really soon. Probably next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Why and the Buy podcast. If you liked us, subscribe. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, and really anywhere else you can get a podcast. And if you really liked us, then give us a 5-star review. We like those, and we like you too. Here at the Why and the Buy podcast, we've got our own house band. Christie and I think they're absolutely perfect for what we're trying to do with this podcast, and we hope you think so too. If you like them as much as we do, then you should check them out. They're called Haskins, and they're based in southeastern Michigan. You can find their music and more at haskinsmusic.com. Go check them out.